I used to think Zoey and I had a solid marriage. Not perfect because what relationship is? But real. We had been together for 6 years, married for 3, and while we had our ups and downs, I never doubted that she was my person. At least, that's what I thought. Looking back, the signs were there. Subtle at first, she started dressing differently, tighter clothes, more makeup, perfume that lingered even when she claimed she had just been running errands. She became protective of her phone, tilting it away whenever I walked by. At night, she'd stay up long after I went to bed, texting someone, always brushing it off with, just talking to a friend, Ross. Go to sleep. I ignored it. Told myself I was overthinking. Then came the money point. One day, I noticed that our rent payments hadn't been withdrawn from our bank account. It made no sense. Zoey handled the payments, but we had always been on time. When I asked her about it, she waved a dismissive hand. Oh, I already took care of it. Don't stress. That was the first time my stomach tightened with doubt, because the truth was, I wasn't stressed. I was confused that I had no idea that my entire marriage was about to come crashing down, that I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Zoey's explanation about the rent didn't sit right with me, but I told myself I was just being paranoid. Still, curiosity got the best of me. That night, while Zoey was in the shower, I logged into our joint bank account. Nothing had been withdrawn for rent in 3 months. My chest tightened. That wasn't a mistake, that was intentional. I checked our landlord's contact in my phone. Mr. Keller. A man in his late 50s, always polite but distant. He had never mentioned any issues with payments. No late fees. No eviction notices. Why, something was wrong. The next morning, I decided to go straight to the source. I waited until Zoey left for her morning yoga class, and went to Keller's office in the apartment complex. He wasn't surprised to see me. If anything, he looked amused. Ross, he greeted, leaning back in his chair. What can I do for you? I cleared my throat. Just wanted to check on something. I noticed our rent hasn't been withdrawn in months. Did Zoey send the payments some other way? There was a pause. Then a slow, knowing smile spread across his face. Your rent's covered, Ross. Paid in full. A cold chill ran down my spine. By who? Keller tilted his head. By Zoey, of course. I swallowed. How? He chuckled. Let's just say, we worked out an arrangement. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to believe it. But the way he looked at me, the smug satisfaction in his eyes, told me everything. Zoey wasn't paying rent with money, she was paying with something else. Keller's smirk sat on his face like a brand of ownership, like he knew something I didn't. But I did know that I just didn't want to admit it. What kind of arrangement? My voice was low, controlled. Keller shrugged. That's between me and Zoey. That was it. No denial. No explanation. Just a smug, knowing response. My fists clenched at my sides, and for a moment, I wanted to grab him by the collar and demand the truth. But deep down, I already knew what I'd find. I turned on my heel and walked out. I drove back home, my thoughts racing. I needed proof. Zoey was still out, probably at yoga, so I went straight to her closet, heart pounding. If she was sleeping with Keller, there had to be something. It didn't take long to find it. Tucked inside a shoebox, buried beneath scarves, was a black lace lingerie set. One I had never seen her wear. My chest tightened. This wasn't for me. Then I spotted her tablet on the nightstand, screen dim but not locked. I picked it up, hesitated for a second, then swiped it open. There were messages. Photos, and videos. I tapped the most recent file, and my world collapsed. There she was, Zoey. In our bed. With Keller. I dropped the tablet, my breath coming in short, uneven bursts. This wasn't just cheating. This was intentional. Ongoing, and she had never planned for me to find out. But now she was going to face the truth. I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the tablet like it was a live grenade. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to breathe. Zoey had done this. She had brought him into our home, our bed. And she had recorded it like a trophy, like proof of how much of a fool I had been. That I should have been furious. I should have been flipping the room upside down. But instead, I felt numb. Then I heard the front door open. Zoey was home. Her voice rang out from the hallway. "Babe? You here?" I didn't answer. A moment later, she walked into the bedroom, casually tossing her gym bag onto the floor. She was still wearing her leggings and a tank top, hair barely damp from a workout. She froze when she saw me. Saw the tablet in my hands. I finally looked up at her, my voice low, eerily calm. "How long?" Zoey blinked. "What?" I turned the screen toward her. The paused video of her and Keller was still there, undeniable. Her face drained of color. "Ross. I can explain." I stood up slowly, my heart pounding. "Then start explaining." She swallowed hard, eyes darting around the room like she was searching for an escape, and that's when she did what I should have expected. She lied. Zoey took a shaky breath, then put on her innocent act. "Ross, it's not what you think." I laughed. A hollow, bitter sound. "Not what I think?" I had literally just watched a video of her with our landlord in our bed. What else could it possibly be? She took a cautious step forward. "Listen, I was going to tell you, but I didn't know how." I clenched my jaw. "So you figured you'd just keep sleeping with him and hope I never found out?" She crossed her arms, flipping into defensive mode. "It's not like that, okay? I was doing this for us." I stared at her, stunned. "For us?" She nodded quickly. "We were behind on rent, Ross. I didn't want to stress you out, so you what? Paid in sex?" She flinched at the word but didn't deny it. I took a step closer, my voice dropping. "You could have told me. We could have figured something out together. But instead, you went behind my back." Zoey exhaled sharply. "It's not like I had feelings for him. It was just physical. A transaction. A transaction, like our marriage meant nothing. Like her body was just another form of currency." I shook my head, my hands shaking. "You're unbelievable." Her eyes narrowed. "Oh, so I'm the bad guy now? Maybe if you were actually around instead of working all the time, I wouldn't have had to find a solution on my own." That did it. I felt something snap inside me. I had worked my ass off to support us, to keep our lives stable. And this was her excuse. Zoey had already crossed the line. But now, she was trying to blame me. I stood there, gripping the tablet so tightly my knuckles turned white. Zoey wasn't just lying, she was twisting reality. Making herself the victim. Making me feel like I was somehow responsible for her betrayal. I let out a slow, bitter breath. "So let me get this straight," I said, my voice eerily calm. "You weren't cheating. You were just handling our rent. For us." Zoey folded her arms, shifting her weight. "I didn't have a choice, Ross." I scoffed. "You didn't have a choice. You could have come to me. We could have worked something out. Taken a loan. Found a side job. Anything." She shook her head. "You were already stressed enough. I thought I was fixing things." I stared at her, disgusted. "Fixing things? You were screwing our landlord behind my back and filming it. That's not fixing anything, Zoey. That's destroying our marriage." She sighed, exasperated, like I was the one being difficult. "Look, I know it sounds bad, it is bad." I snapped. "It's the worst thing you could have done." Zoey ran a hand through her hair, shifting her tone. "Ross, be honest. We haven't exactly been happy." I felt my stomach tighten. "What are you trying to say?" She sighed dramatically. "Things between us haven't been great. You've been so focused on work, and honestly, our sex life has been boring. I clenched my jaw. There it was. The real excuse, so this wasn't just about the rent, I muttered. You were going to do this anyway. Zoey hesitated, then shrugged. I mean. Keller made me feel wanted. I stared at her, stunned. Wanted? He's a 50-something-year-old creep who took advantage of you. She rolled her eyes. It wasn't like that. I was in control. I made the choice. I shook my head in disbelief. And you never planned to stop, did you? She bit her lip but didn't answer. That silence said everything. My hands curled into fists. So what now, Zoey? You want me to just accept this? Pretend it never happened? She shrugged again, like she had already moved on. I don't know, Ross. But I don't want us to end like this. I exhaled slowly. She didn't want us to end, but she had already ended us. That I looked at the tablet one last time, at the proof of her betrayal. Then I set it down gently on the dresser. I think you and Keller should figure out what happens next, I said. Because I'm done. Zoey's eyes widened. Ross, wait, but I was already walking away. She had lied to me, used me, and blamed me for her mistakes. Now, she could live with them. I walked out of the bedroom, leaving Zoey standing there, stunned. For the first time, she realized she couldn't talk her way out of this. She chased after me into the living room, her voice desperate now. Ross, don't do this. Let's just talk, okay? I turned to face her, my jaw tight. What's left to talk about, Zoey? You didn't just cheat. You made a whole arrangement with our landlord. You recorded it. You hid it. And when I confronted you, you tried to blame me. She crossed her arms, frustration flashing in her eyes. You're making it sound worse than it is. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. How exactly should I make it sound, Zoey? Should I call it budgeting instead of cheating? Her face twisted in irritation. I told you, it was just sex. It didn't mean anything. I shook my head in disbelief. You keep saying that like it makes it better. She took a deep breath, her tone softening again, trying a new angle. Ross, come on. We've been through so much together. Are you really going to throw everything away over one mistake? I felt a fresh wave of anger surge through me. One mistake? I repeated. Zoey, this wasn't a drunken one-night stand. This wasn't a moment of weakness. You planned this. You made a whole system out of it. You decided that your body was a fair trade for rent, and you didn't think I deserved to know. She had the audacity to scoff. You're acting like I sold myself on the street. I clenched my fists. What's the difference? She fell silent. For a split second, I saw it guilt. But it wasn't strong enough to change anything. She wasn't sorry for what she had done, she was only sorry that she got caught. That I exhaled sharply, running a hand through my hair. I need some air. Zoey stepped forward, panic flashing in her eyes. Wait. Where are you going? Away from you. She reached for my arm. Ross, come on. We can work through this. I pulled back. No, Zoey. We can't. Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but for once, she had nothing to say. I grabbed my keys and walked out, slamming the door behind me. I didn't know where I was driving. I just needed to go. My hands were gripping the wheel, my heart pounding. I thought about calling a friend, but what would I even say? Hey, my wife has been sleeping with our landlord to cover the rent. Any advice? It was too humiliating. So instead, I found myself parked outside a bar. I went in, ordered a drink, and sat in silence. I had just taken my first sip when my phone buzzed. A text, not from Zoey, from Keller. My stomach twisted. I hesitated, then opened the message. We should talk. I clenched my jaw. That bastard had some nerve. For a moment, I wanted to ignore him. But then again, Maybe I needed to hear what he had to say, maybe I needed more truth than Zoey had given me. So I texted back, fine. Where? Keller sent the location, a small, dimly lit bar on the other side of town. It wasn't the kind of place I'd expect him to be. It was low-key, not at all like the upscale office where I had confronted him earlier. I sat in my car outside the place for a few minutes, gripping the steering wheel. Why was I even here? What could Keller possibly say that would make any of this make sense? But I had too many questions running through my head. Did he approach Zoey with this arrangement? Or did she offer it first? How long had this been going on before she stopped paying rent with money? Did she do this with other men before Keller? Did she plan to keep doing it even now that I knew? I needed answers. I pushed open the car door, stepped out, and walked inside. Keller was already there, sitting at a booth in the back. A drink in front of him, completely unbothered. He didn't look surprised when I slid into the seat across from him. He just smirked. I wasn't sure if you'd actually show up, he said, swirling his drink. I folded my arms. You wanted to talk. So talk. He let out a small chuckle. You're direct. I respect that. I wasn't interested in his fake pleasantries. Why did you text me? Keller leaned forward slightly. Because I think you deserve to hear the truth. The whole truth. I frowned. What truth? That my wife has been screwing you for months? He tilted his head. That's not the real story. I clenched my jaw. Cut the games, Keller. Just say what you need to say. He exhaled and took a sip of his drink before speaking. Ross. Zoey and I didn't just start this when you fell behind on rent. My blood turned cold. I stared at him. What? He leaned back against the booth, watching my reaction. She came to me before the payments stopped. I felt my stomach drop. Keller continued, unfazed. It wasn't about the money at first. She just wanted something different. I swallowed hard. Are you saying she was already looking for something outside of your marriage, Ross? The rent situation just gave her a reason to make it regular. I sat there, stunned, my pulse pounding in my ears. Zoey hadn't just made a desperate mistake, she had been cheating long before the financial problems started. The rent was just her excuse. I shook my head. You're lying. Keller gave a small, amused smirk. I knew you'd say that. So here. He pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, and turned the screen toward me. A text thread. My heart nearly stopped as I read the messages. Zoey, I can't wait until the next time. Keller, you're insatiable. Does Ross even touch you anymore? Zoey, not like you do. Keller, should we slow down? Zoey, no. I like the risk. Besides, he'll never find out. I clenched my fists so tightly my nails dug into my palms. The messages were from almost a year ago. We weren't even behind on rent at that point. This wasn't a sacrifice she made for us, this was her choice. Keller pulled his phone back and took another sip of his drink. Now you know. I stood up so fast the table shook. People around us turned to look, but I didn't care. My hands were shaking. My whole body was shaking. Keller just sighed. I figured that would piss you off. I glared at him. You used her. You knew she was married, and you didn't care. He raised an eyebrow. She didn't care either. I wanted to hit him. Badly. But I wasn't going to waste that kind of energy on him, because the real problem wasn't Keller. It was Zoey. She had betrayed me. Lied to me. Made me feel like I was crazy for suspecting anything, and now, she was about to lose everything. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the bar. I knew exactly where I was going. It was time for one last conversation with my wife. I drove home like a man possessed. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, my mind racing with everything Keller had just told me. Zoey hadn't just made a mistake. She hadn't just fallen into an affair because of tough circumstances, she had chosen this. She had gone to Keller before we had financial problems. She had been sneaking around for almost a year, and all this time, she let me believe that I was the one failing her. the words from her texts kept ringing in my ears, I like the risk. He'll never find out. Well, I did find out. And now, she was going to answer for it. When I pulled into the driveway, I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. I couldn't go in there screaming. Zoey would just twist things, make herself the victim like she always did. No, I needed to be smart. That I walked into the house, and Zoey was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. She looked up when I came in, a forced, hesitant smile on her lips. Hey. I thought you needed air. I shut the door behind me and tossed my keys on the table. Yeah, I did. Took a little drive. Had a conversation. She frowned, sitting up straighter. With who? I let the silence stretch before I answered. Keller. Zoey's face froze. Just for a split second. But I caught it. That I walked closer, keeping my voice calm. Tell me something, Zoey. How long have you been sleeping with him? She swallowed, but she recovered fast. Ross, I already told you no. Don't give me that rent excuse. I leaned forward, eyes locked on hers. Tell me the truth. How long? Her lips parted, and I saw the wheels turning in her head. She was calculating, figuring out what she could get away with. Finally, she sighed. 6 months. Lied. I let out a cold chuckle. 6 months. I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the screen, showing her the messages Keller had given me. Then why was he texting you about this a year ago? Zoey's entire body stiffened. She opened her mouth, but for the first time, she had nothing to say. Go on, I said. Explain it. She blinked rapidly, her brain scrambling for an escape. I was going to tell you, Ross. I didn't know how. I stared at her, disgusted. You didn't know how. I gestured to the phone. You didn't seem too confused in these messages. You were excited. You liked sneaking around. You said you liked the risk. Zoey stood up now, her hands clenched at her sides. I was just caught up in the thrill, okay? It didn't mean anything. I scoffed. Didn't mean anything? My voice dropped lower. So why'd you keep recording it? Her breath hitched. Yeah. I knew about that too. Zoey's whole demeanor changed. She wasn't the confident, dismissive woman from before. Now, she was panicking. Ross, I swear, I wasn't going to what? Keep doing it? Keep lying to my face? I stepped closer, my voice sharp. When were you going to tell me, Zoey? Were you ever? Or was I just supposed to find out after Keller got bored of you? She looked down, avoiding my gaze. That was my answer. I felt something inside me break. The last piece of hope that maybe, just maybe, there was something left to save, but there wasn't. Zoey finally looked up, her expression shifting again. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging for forgiveness. Instead, her face hardened. So, what now? She said, folding her arms. I stared at her. That was it? That was all she had to say? I laughed under my breath, shaking my head. Wow. You don't even care, do you? Zoey's jaw tightened. What do you want me to say, Ross? That I regret it? Fine. I regret it. I exhaled slowly. No, you don't. She didn't deny it, she just stood there, waiting. She had already moved on, and now, so would I. I turned and walked toward the bedroom. Where are you going? She asked. I didn't look back. Packing my stuff. Zoey's voice sharpened. Oh, so you're just gonna run? I stopped at the doorway, turning to face her one last time. No, Zoey. I'm leaving. And this time, there was no stopping me. I walked into the bedroom and pulled out a suitcase, my hands steady even though my heart was pounding. This was it. I was leaving. No more second guessing. No more hoping for a miracle that wasn't coming. Behind me, Zoey stormed into the room, her voice sharp. "You're really doing this?" she snapped. "Just packing up and walking out?" I didn't answer. I just grabbed my shirts from the dresser and tossed them into the suitcase. Zoey let out an incredulous laugh. "Wow, Ross. After everything we've been through, you're just going to quit?" I froze mid-motion, then turned to face her. "Quit?" I repeated, my voice low. "You don't get to say that, Zoey. You quit on us the moment you crawled into Keller's bed." Her jaw tightened, but I wasn't done. "You had so many chances to come clean. To fix this. Instead, you lied. Again. And again. And again." I took a step closer, forcing her to meet my eyes. "So don't stand there and act like I'm the one walking away from this marriage. You ended it long before I did." Zoey's lips parted, but she didn't speak. Because she knew I was right, that I turned back to my suitcase and zipped it shut. As I grabbed my suitcase and headed for the door, Zoey's voice softened. "Ross, wait." I stopped, but I didn't turn around. She sighed. "Can't we talk about this?" I let out a humorless laugh. "We've been talking, Zoey. And every time, all you've done is lie." She stepped closer, placing a hesitant hand on my arm. "I messed up. I know I did. But don't throw away 6 years over this." I finally turned to her, shaking my head. "You didn't just mess up, Zoey. You made a choice. Over and over again." She blinked rapidly, like she was actually on the verge of tears. "But even now, I couldn't tell if they were real." "I still love you," she whispered. A sharp pain stabbed through my chest. That I believed, once, that she did. But love isn't lying. Love isn't betrayal. Love isn't using your husband as a backup while you sleep with other men. That I swallowed hard, my voice steady. "No, Zoey. You love the life we had. You don't love me." She opened her mouth to argue, but she couldn't. Because she knew it was true. That I exhaled and stepped past her. "Ross." Her voice was smaller now. That I didn't stop this time. That I walked out of the bedroom. Out of the house, and this time, I wasn't looking back. That I drove for hours, no destination in mind. I just needed distance. Space to think. The rage was still there, simmering under my skin. But beneath it was relief. For the first time in months, I wasn't drowning in suspicion, trying to figure out what Zoey was hiding. Because now, I knew, and I was free. That I pulled into a cheap motel parking lot, booked a room for the night, and sat on the bed, staring at the ceiling. That it hurt more than I could even process yet. But I wasn't broken. That I would heal. And Zoey, she'd have to live with what she'd done, without me. The motel room was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that forces you to think, even when you don't want to. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything that had just happened. Zoey was gone. No, not gone. I was gone. That I had left her standing in the house we built, in the life she destroyed. And now, for the first time since this nightmare started, I was alone. The weight of it pressed down on me. The betrayal. The humiliation. The years I had invested in a marriage that, in the end, meant nothing to her. I had told her I was done. I had walked out, but the thing about betrayal is that it doesn't just go away once you leave. It lingers, and tonight, it was suffocating me. I sat up, rubbing a hand down my face. My phone sat on the nightstand, screen dark. No messages. No missed calls. Zoey hadn't reached out, not even once. That I shouldn't have cared. I shouldn't have wanted her to. But part of me, some pathetic, broken part, kept checking. Kept waiting for her to say something, anything, but she didn't. And I hated myself for expecting her to. I sighed and grabbed my phone, scrolling aimlessly. Then, out of nowhere, a text popped up. Not from Zoey, from Keller. "You made the right call, man. She was never yours to begin with." I saw red. I gripped the phone so tightly my fingers ached. Keller had won. He had taken my wife, my marriage, and now he was gloating. I wasn't going to let this slide. Before I even had time to think, I was grabbing my keys, storming out of the motel room, and getting in my car that I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know what I was going to say, but Keller had started this, and I was going to finish it. That I pulled up to his building, barely remembering the drive there. My blood was boiling, my hands clenched so tightly around the steering wheel I thought I might break it. That I got out of the car and slammed the door shut, marching toward his office. It was late, but his lights were still on. Good. That I pushed the door open without knocking. Keller looked up from his desk, raising an eyebrow. Well. That was fast. I didn't say a word. I just walked straight up to him and slammed my fist into his face. That he staggered back, clutching his jaw, eyes wide. Jesus, Ross. What the hell? I stood over him, breathing hard, fists still clenched. You don't get to text me like that. He wiped his lip, checking for blood, and let out a low chuckle. Guess you're still angry. I almost hit him again, but I didn't. Instead, I took a step back and exhaled sharply, forcing myself to think, you're a disgusting bastard, you know that? I muttered. Keller shrugged, still smirking. I never pretended to be anything else. I shook my head. Was Zoey just another woman to you? Or was this personal? His smirk faded just a little. What do you think? I clenched my jaw. I think you knew exactly what you were doing. I think you got off on the fact that she was married. That I trusted her. Keller tilted his head, studying me. Maybe. Or maybe you should be asking yourself why she was so easy to take. That hit like a punch to the gut because I already knew the answer. Zoey wasn't stolen. She chose this, she chose him, and the worst part, I let her. That I took a step back, my hand still shaking, but the rage was fading. It wasn't worth it. Zoey had made her decision. Keller had played his part, but I wasn't going to let them ruin me any more than they already had. That I turned and walked toward the door. Hey, Ross, Keller called after me. That I stopped but didn't turn around. She's going to do this again, you know. I exhaled through my nose. Not my problem anymore. Then I walked out, for good. That I walked out of Keller's office, slamming the door behind me. The night air was sharp, cold against my burning skin. My pulse was still racing, my fists aching from the impact of that one, satisfying punch, but it wasn't enough. Not really, because no matter how hard I hit him, no matter how much I wanted to wipe that smug look off his face, he wasn't the real problem. Zoey was, and no matter how much I wanted to pretend I was past it, I wasn't. That I got in my car and gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. I didn't want to go back to the motel. Sitting in that tiny, lifeless room with nothing but my thoughts felt like a slow death. But where else could I go? Everything I had, my home, my marriage, my future, was gone. Torn apart by the one person I had trusted the most. That I should have seen it coming. The signs had been there. The late nights. The secretive behavior. The sudden changes in how she dressed, how she carried herself. Zoey had been slipping away from me for a long time. That I was just too blind to see it. That I turned on the engine and started driving, but I didn't head back to the motel. Instead, I drove aimlessly, letting the road stretch ahead of me, letting my mind try to make sense of everything. Somewhere along the drive, my phone buzzed. That I ignored it at first, assuming it was Keller trying to taunt me again, but then it buzzed again, and again. Finally, I glanced at the screen. Zoey. That I gritted my teeth, my jaw tightening. After everything, now she wanted to talk. I let it ring, debating whether I should just block her and move on, but some part of me, the part that still wanted to hear her suffer, to hear her admit she had lost me, made me answer. That I put the phone on speaker, not bothering with pleasantries. What? There was silence on the other end for a second, then a small breath. Ross, she said, her voice softer than I expected. Where are you? I scoffed. Does it matter? She hesitated. I just needed to hear your voice. My grip on the wheel tightened. Was she serious? Zoey, I don't know what game you're playing, but I'm done. You don't get to do this. You don't get to cheat, lie, and then act like I'm the one you miss. I do miss you, she whispered. That I laughed coldly. You miss having me around, you mean? You miss the stability. You missed the fact that I actually gave a damn about you. Ross, please, she said, and this time, I heard something different in her voice, not defiance, not manipulation, fear. I frowned. What's going on? She sniffed. I made a mistake. I rolled my eyes. No kidding. No, Ross, I mean, she let out a shaky breath. I tried to end things with Keller. I blinked. Tried? She hesitated. He didn't take it well. For the first time since this all started, I felt something I didn't expect to feel, concern, because as much as I hated Zoey for what she did to me, I knew one thing for sure, Keller wasn't the type to let go easily. What did he do? I asked, my voice tight. She sniffed again. He came over. He wouldn't leave. He was angry. He said I owed him. I clenched my jaw. Owed him for what? He already got what he wanted. There was a pause, then Zoey whispered, he said if I don't keep seeing him, he'll ruin me. He has videos, Ross. More than the ones you saw. My blood went cold. Of course, Keller had more. Of course, he had insurance, and now, Zoey was trapped. I exhaled, rubbing a hand over my face. This wasn't my problem anymore. Zoey had made her choice, but damn it, part of me, the part that still remembered the woman I fell in love with before all of this, felt something I didn't want to feel, responsibility. I could have hung up. I could have told her that she got exactly what she deserved, but the image of Keller, standing over her, holding her mistakes over her head like a weapon, it made my skin crawl. Zoey had betrayed me. Lied to me. But Keller, he was worse. I let out a slow breath, my pulse steady. Where are you now? There was a pause, then she whispered, at home. I closed my eyes for a second, then put the car in gear. I knew I was making a mistake, but some mistakes, you have to make anyway. Stay there, I said, my voice firm. I'm coming over. I pulled up to the house, my stomach twisted in knots. I shouldn't have come. Zoey wasn't my problem anymore. But Keller? He had gone too far. Zoey opened the door before I could knock. Her eyes were red, her expression a mix of guilt and fear. She wasn't faking this. He's been calling non-stop, she whispered, gripping her phone. I think he's outside. I tensed, scanning the street. And then I saw him, Keller's car, parked down the block. Watching. Waiting. My fists clenched. Zoey grabbed my arm. Ross, what do we do? For the first time since this started, she was looking to me for protection, and even though I hated her for what she did, I wasn't going to let Keller win. I stared at Keller's car, my blood boiling. He wasn't just watching, he was taunting us. Zoey clung to my arm, her breath shaky. Ross, what if he tries to come inside? I exhaled sharply, stepping forward, shaking her off. He won't have to. I wasn't waiting for him to make the first move. I marched down the driveway, my heart hammering, hands curled into fists. I was done being the guy who got walked all over. Keller saw me coming. His smirk was already in place when he rolled down his window. Didn't expect you back here, Ross. I leaned into his car, my voice low, controlled. You're done, Keller. His smirk widened. Done? With what? Zoey? I don't think so. She and I have unfinished business. Rage coiled inside me, but I kept my voice steady. Unfinished? You mean the videos? You think blackmail is gonna keep her coming back to you? He chuckled. Oh, I don't think I know. She made her choices, Ross. You, of all people, should understand that. I wanted to punch him again. Harder this time. But I wasn't going to let him drag me down to his level. Instead, I pulled out my phone and held up the screen. I know all about your little side projects, I said, tapping through a folder of documents, emails, financial records. You think Zoey's the only one you've done this to? For the first time, Keller's smirk faltered. Yeah. I had done my homework that I had spent the entire drive digging through everything I could find on Keller, and it turned out Zoey wasn't the first married woman he had trapped in his little game. He had done this before. And worse? He had been stupid enough to leave a trail. If these videos get leaked, I continued, voice calm, I make sure they get traced back to you. You don't just lose your tenants, Keller. You lose your entire business. Your reputation. Your life. Keller's jaw tightened. You're bluffing. I stepped closer. Try me. There was a long, tense silence, then, finally, Keller's mask cracked, his smirk disappeared, replaced with something darker. Something closer to rage. You think you've won, he muttered, gripping the wheel. You think she's innocent? His eyes flickered to the house. She'll betray you again. It's in her nature. I clenched my jaw. It didn't matter anymore. This isn't about her, I said. It's about you being done. You're going to leave her alone. You're going to disappear. And if you don't? I tapped my phone again. This goes public. His nostrils flared, but he knew. He had no way out. Finally, after a long pause, Keller exhaled sharply and gripped his keys. This isn't over. Yes, it is. He put the car in gear, staring at me for one last moment, and then he drove away. That I didn't move until his taillights disappeared into the night. Then, I turned back toward the house. Zoey was still standing in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself. She looked at me like she didn't know who I was anymore, like she didn't expect me to save her, and the truth was, I hadn't. She had burned everything between us long before Keller entered the picture. I walked past her, into the house, grabbed my suitcase from where I had left it, and turned back toward the door. Zoey's voice was soft, barely above a whisper. Ross, what now? I met her eyes, and I told her the truth. You figure out how to fix your life, Zoey. I stepped outside. But I'm not going to be in it. She sucked in a breath, but I didn't wait for a response. I walked to my car, got inside, and drove off, this time for good. As I drove away, I didn't look back. Not at Zoey. Not at the house. Not at the wreckage she had created. Keller was gone. The threats were over. But the damage? That would take time to heal. I had spent years believing in a future that was never real, but now? I was free. Zoey would have to face the consequences of her choices alone. And me, I was finally moving forward. For the first time in a long time, I had nothing left to lose.